June 1922. They had stayed in York when Thomas had helped her from the train. After leaving Cambridge, Rutherford and Thomas, with Milo's consent, had agreed a fortnight, but she must be back. She was needed. But she had taken the cloud chamber calculations with her. At any rate, Blackett was trying a new form, by taking carbon dioxide and cooling it below freezing, so that when it warmed the diffused particles could mark the tracks. Milo had suggested photography to record the experiments, and Chadwick had agreed, he, Cockcroft and Walton all breaking for lunch to discuss potential photography techniques. "I would like you to come, if that's what you would like," Thomas told her, when they had got to the hotel room that Thomas had paid for. He hadn't had to, but he wanted to. It was a break for him as well as her, and their return would coincide with Milo's family's arrival. Plus, he had found the money he knew O'Brien had hidden in her room. He was right that she had overlooked it, and it was put to good use with a dinner and, potentially, an evening out. "But I will stay with you while you work. But nothing after midnight, you get too tired. Then you get grumpy next day." It was true. Milo did want to stay and work. But she could tell Thomas had wanted to go out somewhere, so they walked to a club with a jazz band, one Thomas seemed to know, like the one they had visited with Blackett. Just men like me, he had told her, and Milo had understood. "And you will be well here." Milo knew that. And she did like the jazz. Come on, Thomas had persuaded her, "I'd like you to come with me." And Milo had come, and they danced, and she saw Thomas's gaze linger on some of the place, feeling her heart sink. What was it he saw some of these men? What was it he liked? It wasn't the first time Milo had thought that, and knew that Thomas being in her company meant it was more conventional. Milo didn't mind. She liked the music, and she recalled how happy he was when he was with some of her colleagues in their makeshift dancing hall. It had been the underground cellars of the chapel 2 weeks before. While she knew what caused women to have children, Milo did not precisely know what it was Thomas was looking for in a man. Words like, the Duke of Devonshire and Oscar Wilde circulated about, when things of such were discussed. And one night Thomas and Blackett had gone off together, leaving Milo in Otto Friss's company, appearing a few hours later with the same fulfilled look on his face as Milo remembered seeing when he had spent time alone with Ernest. "Your grandmother is coming to Downton Abbey," Thomas told her, as they took the train the next morning. Smoke and steam enveloped the platforms, and when it had cleared, Milo was looking at him, shocked. Thomas stared back. "What? You are not making a joke, are you?" Thomas shook his head, and drew her close to him, kissing her forehead. "The Dowager Countess has invited her. She knew her once, or so she says. 2 of your aunts, as well," he added. Aunt Helen, Aunt Isabella. Both were just a little older than Milo, both unmarried. Helen in particular had made a fuss of Milo when she had been in Ireland, and she liked her aunt, who always wanted her to look nice, but didn't care if she went off to do what she liked. One evening, when Margaret Jameson thought Milo had gone to bed, she heard Helen and her mother arguing. "Why does she have to go off and do the things she's doing?" the Jameson matriarch complained. "She is just like Ernest," Helen had told her. "That's the problem, getting into mischief of all sorts." "Prue is with her," Isabella had said. "But, it isn't seemly in a young lady who needs to be a young lady. Boys can get away with it. How will a girl make a living? How will you?" Helen had laughed, and pointed out a conversation they had had when Margaret's mother had been alive. "She's like you, Mama," Helen had told Mrs. Jameson. "What did you do?" "Pull myself together and marry a man who was good for me." And that was what Milo had done. She had married a man who was good for her. Thomas Barrow, who had come to find out how she was, and agreed to take her somewhere where Rutherford, thought would be good for her. And it probably would be. But how was she going to talk to him about the lease? "Your family are coming in on the afternoon train, from Liverpool," Thomas told her. "Why do you think I delayed our journey?" And when they had got off the York-Edinburgh train, they had waited, only for Milo to be rewarded by a lady disembarking, followed by 2 younger ladies and a man arranging their bags. With no compunction about decorum, Milo left Thomas's side, tearing over to them. "Grandmother, me Lucina, it is so good to see you," Isabella and Helen said, in unison. Milo looked to them, and beamed. "Mocaline," said Jack Prue, smiling down to her. "How you have grown." "And who is this?" Margaret Jameson stepped past her daughters and granddaughters, and stood before Thomas. "Barrow, madam," said Thomas. "Thomas Barrow." Mrs. Jameson's face transformed into one of wry knowing. "Your husband, my dear," she said stiffly to Milo, and nevertheless gave Thomas a warm smile. "I received your letters, Mr. Barrow," she told him, and offered him her hand, smiling to him, as Milo watched. "And you are most welcome into our family." 888,888,888. "Tell me again why you wrote to these people?" asked Robert Crawley of his mother. It was usually he who played the role of Samaritan. What was it that Violet wanted was what he wanted to know. "I merely took pity on the poor people," the Dowager Countess replied, stiffly. "Really, Robert? You seem to imply that I must have an agenda for everything. Though why my letter was delayed I really don't know." "Well, there is a lot of unrest in Ireland. What with the country gaining its freedom," Tom Branson told them. At this, he had everyone's attention. "I just mean, a new government, new social structures, new houses for those burned out of theirs." Lady Violet interrupted. It was fortunate for Margaret Jameson that she was out of Daphne. The blaze could be seen from the Wicklow Mountains, or so I am given to understand. "Imagine what it would be like if the whiskey had still been there," Lady Mary put in. Edith gave her a frown. "That's horrid," she told her sister. "A family burned out." "Another one? They are new money, aren't they?" "What's your point?" asked Mary, spearing fish onto her fork. "That surely they earned their money in whiskey, after an emigrant family came from Scotland, that their business was just that, business." She looked to Tom Branson. "Or am I mistaken? This family were never the ruling landlords that Parnell was intending to overthrow?" "I believe Parnell, and many other new families, were the instigators in all of this," Lord Grantham told them, cutting across Tom Branson, making sure he did not say anything at all on this particular subject. "No one can control a mob once a mob has been legitimized." He looked across to his mother. "Anyway, Mama, I am pleased that you invited them. They can get their affairs sorted out and decide what to do next. And I am sure Miss Ashby will be pleased to see her." "You were awfully generous in letting Barrow go off and fetch her," Cora Crawley told her husband. "I keep reading in the papers of Rutherford's exploits, what he is achieving, this new progress in physics." She looked happily to her husband. "And I keep thinking, she was a little girl once, in our house, interested in so many things, and now working shoulder to shoulder with such academics." Lady Mary snorted. "What?" asked Edith, frowning. "I think she is doing well. You were there at her presentation and she has her own published work now." "We civilized her, you mean," Mary replied, scornfully. "She was a little bratling, charging round here, no mother, making trouble for Carson." Edith continued to stare at her. "Well, I have decided, if she will speak to me, my next column will be about women in science." "Hardly," Mary scoffed. "She can barely sit still for more than 5 minutes." "Who else do you have lined up?" "Madame Curie." "You laugh, but Madame Curie has worked with Rutherford. In fact, they were at a conference together last year, as well as having traveled to the United States for her radium." "As well we know," Cora Crawley put in, smiling to Edith. "It saved her experiments, and how wonderful that there are so many talented people in the world that have the ability to discover new things." "A grateful nation gave her the gift," she added. "Quite right, Mama," Edith replied. "Milo would know, so I am going to ask her." She broke off as a clatter came from their grandmother's direction, which stopped Mary's next swipe at her sister. "Oh my darlings, I seem to have dropped a fork," she said, in mock apology. It had stopped them bickering at least. Mary looked down. She still hadn't gone through all of Matthew's things. The witnessed letter had been accepted as a will, but that meant death duties twice. At least Branson was handling some of it. He seemed sensible. And Irish people on the estate might make him feel a little happier. "And where are they staying, this family?" Mary asked, coldly. "I have offered them the gamekeeper cottage, said Lord Grantham. "It's out of the way they can keep their affairs to themselves, and us ours. They are close enough to join us if we invite them. They probably have enough while their business assets are frozen to employ a daily they have a manservant." "And won't the gamekeeper mind?" Mary asked, bitterly. It was no secret that she didn't like me Lucina Ashby, no matter what she did, and her family would be no better. "As you well know, the gamekeeper lives in the village, Mary dear," said her grandmother. "Now, eat your dinner, and we will see the refugees tomorrow." 88,888,888. It had been a happy few weeks, Milo had thought, looking back to June. She had stayed with Mrs. Crawley. As the woman had agreed, she came to the gamekeeper cottage to see her grandmother and Prue, and up to Downton to see the family. Milo's fears grew, however, when she first felt the loss of Matthew Crawley. Not herself, for she was too far removed to feel his death, but in the faces, the manners, the demeanours of those who loved him. Mrs. Crawley, though happy to host her, was distant, as if locked in a world that was not the present, living in a place in the past that was soothing her. Mary, on the other hand, seemed as if all the life had been taken out of her. She was not to talk to any one of the family, Thomas had told her, unless they spoke to her. And Milo wondered, was her manner really so offensive? Were words really so powerful that they could upset someone gravely, even though they must know that Milo would never mean them in any way to cause offense? So she spent most of the first week with Mrs. Jameson, even taking her to the church and showing her the transmitter, still on the tower, that she had used to prove short radio relay, for which she had written in her paper for her graduation. The professor worked on radio before Guglielmo, she told her grandmother. That was what brought Ernest to speak to him, sharing the academic knowledge. That was what made him contemplate the experiments. "Which you proved," Mrs. Jameson told her, proudly. "And there is your home?" Milo felt a bolt of panic in her stomach. It wasn't clear, wasn't sorted. The Sparks had disputed the tenancy and Milo could do nothing without the lease that Matthew Crawley had. And Thomas had told her not to speak to the family. "The man who died, Matthew Crawley," Milo told her grandmother, "he placed the tenants here, to bring income. But, he did not give me the lease that has been signed." "I need," Milo faltered. Mrs. Jameson placed a gentle hand on her back. "You need it firmly, in front of you," she told Milo. "I understand, I do," she added. "I did not think we owned Daphne until I saw the bill of sale. Then I knew it was ours and I could go through the rooms, redecorate and so on." She looked back to the church and the roof. "Shouldn't it come down now?" "Yes," Milo admitted. But another uneasiness replaced the one caused by the lease. In taking it down, it felt like the end of Ernest. It was the last of him here in Downton Village, on the whole of the estate. "I never thought Lady Mary would wish to socialize with your Aunt Helen and Aunt Isabella," Margaret Jameson went on, "but she seems to like them. And that other sister, Edith," she added, "she has spirit." All of which may, or may not be true, Milo thought. But she didn't understand much of what her grandmother was talking about, and she suddenly missed the Cavendish laboratory, and her colleagues, where she could just get on, and they knew one another. It was so easy for her to get on there. Now she understood the rules that the professor had put in place for her. No nightclubs with Blackett, no socializing alone. But the question still remained about the lease, and she had to find it. Find out what was written in it and do it as soon as possible so she could get back there. While she loved her family, her colleagues knew her, and she was comfortable there. She must get rid of that monstrosity before Travis tears it down himself. "Margaret," Milo overheard the Dowager Countess say to her grandmother that evening. The Jamesons had been invited to dinner, and that had included Prue and Milo. Prue, who was placed next to Tom Branson, kept ensuring the conversation flowed, and made conversation that flattered the opinion of Lord Grantham. Thomas noticed, as he stood in as butler for the evening, there was something between them that he must get to the bottom of. Were they allies, or enemies? From the face of Branson? The latter, he deduced. Thomas cast a glance to Milo, in her blue dress, once Lady Sybil's, the one she had worn when they had married, and found to his dismay she seemed unhappy. She was used to Cambridge dinners, of course, and had regaled him with a very rude version of a music hall number which she had picked up. At least she had known it was rude, for she had sung it in a low voice in the early hours of the morning when they had gone back to the hotel in York for a handful of hours' sleep. Maybe he could help her slip away before dessert. Maybe she would like to be below stairs, or somewhere else. She was enduring it for her grandmother's sake, something which Thomas found he was very proud of her for. But Thomas's main pleasure was that Milo above stairs, for her place at Lord Grantham's table, was putting several noses out of joint. Much to his delight, Bates and Anna, of course, and Carson, who had stepped out of the dinner service, Thomas had suspected for that reason. Edna Braithwaite most of all. "We cannot return to Ireland, not now, not yet," Mrs. Jameson told Cora Crawley, who had asked her. "It has become a free state. Houses are being guarded. People are under house arrest. We intend to gather our assets and get to family in Bedfordshire, when we can." She nodded to Lord Grantham and to the Dowager, "And I cannot tell you how grateful we are. We have a little money, some of our belongings." "But your home, my dear, those memories you cherish," Violet Crawley said. "What can be done? It seems to be the way of the world." And, Mrs. Jameson suddenly broke off. "Do I know you, young man?" She was looking intently at Tom Branson. "No," said Tom Branson, looking back to her. "I don't think so, ma'am." "I fear you are wrong," Milo heard her grandmother reply. She gave a quick glance to Prue, who was sitting beside Branson. Ordinarily, Thomas would have been outraged that a mere servant of a visiting family sit at his lordship's table. But he had struck up an intriguing friendship with the man, who had told him that he knew all about Tom Branson's position, and loss of inheritance. That made him Thomas's ally, further confirmed by Jack Prue thanking him for making an honest woman of Milo, that she may pursue a position in life, freely and without obligation to Thomas. "My youngest was married to Gugalilmo's father," Mrs. Jameson told Cora Crawley. "That is how it is that you got a radio transmitter at the top of your magnificent home." She looked to Milo, "As well as my grandson's talents in electrifying Downton, my granddaughter must have brought you great prestige. Rutherford is world-renowned." And the evening finished with the Jamesons returning to the gamekeeper cottage, Milo going into the kitchens and talking to the staff, promising her grandmother that she would follow them up. Thomas Barrow stood by the outhouse and dragged on a cigarette, Jack Prue beside him, waiting for Milo. "That was a very serious face Mr. Branson gave to your mistress this evening," he said to the man, offering a cigarette. The man nodded, taking it. "It was a very serious subject," the man replied. "I have got them all the way here, out of danger, and now him." "And will they go back to Ireland, do you think?" Thomas asked him. Prue looked up as he inhaled on the cigarette, the smoke mingling with the bright pinpoints of the stars, a pale lemon stripe to the west indicating it wasn't yet night. "If they live," he replied, glancing to Thomas. "If they live, that sounds very serious." "It is very serious, Mr. Barrow. You are family now, you should know, I reckon." "And you are?" "Jack Prue," said the man. He was shorter than Thomas, wily, quick-eyed. But instead of taking offense, Thomas offered a hand. "Milo has told me so much about you," he said, and the man's demeanor changed in an instant. "You are the Thomas I have heard so much about," Prue exclaimed. "Come, fellow, we must talk to one another." "Shall we walk?" Thomas nodded towards the gate into the yard, which led into the ground, and the men crossed the land towards the generator building. "He built this, Ernest?" Jack Prue looked up. Thomas, hand on the latch, pushed the door open and switched in the light. The comforting buzz of the generator surrounded him. "He refitted a grain store," Thomas told him. "If you look up, better in the daylight, you will see the holes in the wall where pulleys once were." He watched Prue's face. "You knew him?" "I did, but not for very long. Harold Ashby moved them back here when dear Janet died. Nearly broke Sir Andrew's heart, it did." He breathed in the cigarette smoke. "Brilliant mind. But you would know that," he said, a glisten to his eye. "I don't know what," Thomas began, but Jack Prue just smiled. "There's no fooling me, Mr. Barrow," the Jameson manservant said. He turned, and looked at him seriously. "Considering what I have done in the name of republicanism in my own country, I should have been hanged many times over. I make it my business to know everything." "And why haven't you?" Perhaps Thomas didn't like him so much. After all, he had worn the British uniform for 4 years himself. Perhaps Jack Prue was over here to cause trouble. And yet, Mrs. Jameson had welcomed Thomas's family. "I have the whiskey, see?" Prue pulled out a hip flask and offered it to Thomas. He paused in his acceptance, then took it, swigging back a mouthful before handing it back to Prue, who shook his head. "Very good," Thomas told him. But Prue shook his head. "As good as it is. That partition ... It is the start of trouble, you'll see, not the end of it." He took a swig himself. "But ever since the day of Neil Noinojlark, the Northerners have always been different to us in the South." "And where do you come from?" Thomas asked. "County Cork," said Prue. "So, do you know what is bothering her?" Thomas was going to act ignorant, but thought better of it. This man seemed to be someone worth having on his side, if he was so faithfully on Milo's and her family's side. "There is a lease on the Ashby house, where Mr. Ashby and Ernest and Milo lived and worked. When Mr. Ashby died, Milo inherited the house. She had one rogue tenant, who I helped get rid of." Prue's eyes twinkled. "Mr. Crawley, wife to Lady Mary, son of Mr. Crawley, has died recently. He was a lawyer, and advised Milo to accept a married couple. The man is a leather maker." But it is concerning Milo that she had never seen the lease. "She feels, I think, that it is not her home any longer." "And where do you think this lease is?" "In Mr. Crawley's belongings." Thomas paused, in finishing off his cigarette, and turned to Prue. "I know where the lease is. I know whose hands it is in." "Branson's." "Well?" Thomas looked away and shook his head. "I can't prove it." Then, but Prue broke off when Thomas pushed a copy of Ian Branson's letter towards him. "I know you must be able to read it. You taught her Irish," Thomas added. Prue opened it out, and in a light in the generator room, looked over the words. "Then you understand my point?" Thomas added, as Prue folded it back up once he read it and gave it back to Milo. "And so does she, I presume," Jack Prue said to him, as Thomas slipped the letter back into this pocket. "Unless you can read the Irish yourself." Thomas looked at Prue, and laughed for a minute. No, I cannot," Thomas admitted. "I got Milo to read it. She knows Branson would have been her guardian if we had not married." He threw his cigarette butt onto the floor and stamped it out. "But I feel it has been on her mind, the lease that is." "We can get the lease. Make sure Milo is not implicated in any way," Prue told Thomas. "Ah," Thomas said. "He has attacked her over the guardianship as it is." Jack Prue gave him a very interested look. "Has he now?" the Irishman murmured. "Did you know?" Thomas asked him. "No. Course I knew. I have thought time and again how I could keep that sonny traitor away from her once he found out." Prue looked to Thomas. "And may I say, that is no small thing you did for her. You must care for her a lot." He looked around the generator building. "And look what she is becoming. She could never do that without your protection, Thomas Barrow." And Thomas felt his head droop. Ernest was there. He could feel him. How many times had they been together, if being together only meant lying next to one another? "Don't look like that. We cannot reclaim the past," Prue counseled. "You must have loved Ernest deeply." And Thomas could do nothing more than nod in agreement. "What is a sonny traitor?" Thomas asked, as they left the generator building. Prue looked at him, and Thomas indicated the letter. "A sonny traitor is one who chose the Huns, Mr. Barrow," Prue told him as they walked slowly back to the yard gate to wait for Milo. "As in, Germany?" "The war?" Jack Prue shook his head, smiling. No, Mr. Barrow," he said, a touch of humor in his voice. "What you need to understand is that the Irish outlook to what a Hun is much different. We call the English Huns. But Jack Prue shook his head. "If only Strongbow had not invited the Normans over to be mercenaries," he told Thomas sadly, "it would have saved nearly 1,000 years of trouble." "Yes, the Anglo-Saxon race are, to us, Huns. It is ironic to see that you have been fighting yourselves for 4 years, much as the Irish are fighting themselves now." "Touche, Mr. Barrow," Prue replied. I told my mistress I didn't know whether I would like you, someone who married her granddaughter when she was only 16. But I do like you. And I'll tell you something else, Prue said, as gravel crunched underfoot. What you need to realize is that the whole country has changed. He paused, looking to the window. Milo was just inside. Thomas could see her head as she bobbed it around gaily as she spoke. A Royal Navy ship sailed up the Liffey, Mr. Barrow, and shot Irishmen and Irish women in an effort to subdue. It was then that people realized, if they hadn't before, that Ireland was not in a partnership, but subjugated. He stopped and struck out his own cigarette. It's like Milo and her work with atomic structures. The old idea of Thomson, which was a new idea before that, has been overturned by Rutherford. Oh, some of the old laws still apply, but there are new ones challenging the old. He paused, and breathed in the night air. People who would have unfailingly fallen one way, you cannot predict how they will fall today. It is the Irish middle class who began this revolution, Mr. Barrow, not the poor. But it is the poor that will win it for them. And my poor mistress and her daughters can never go back. The business is sold, gone, as is her home. They closed in on the gate. Milo's voice drifted over from the kitchen. You are very well informed on Milo's work, Mr. Prue, Thomas told him. We are no longer educated under the hedgerow, Mr. Barrow, Jack Prue assured him, clapping him on the shoulder. Then you will help. The hope in Thomas's voice could not be disguised. Jack Prue smiled to him. I will, surely, he agreed. Thomas stood by the shed. Milo was still in the kitchen, talking to the staff. He knew. And you know Tom Branson? Thomas continued. I do know him, Prue admitted. He was of similar mind to me once, or so I thought. He seems to have made himself rather indispensable here. Thomas shook his head in annoyed agreement. That he has, Thomas agreed, through gritted teeth. He was below me in rank once, Thomas told him, and now I must stand by him and wait on him. Then you will be pleased to know that my presence here will make him very uncomfortable, said Jack Prue, happily. I don't blame you. You have chosen your career path, safe, inviting few questions, and I am guessing the hierarchy makes you feel less of ... whatever it is that someone called you once ... someone close to you, who should have had your back. How well he seemed to know, Thomas thought, his talents were wasted in fire-raising. I feel sympathy for your cause, I really do. There are times I would have thrown it all over, but don't be so hard on yourself, Mr. Barrow, Prue replied, sympathetically. The English are bred differently. We none of us can help where we are born, or to whom, or how our childhoods turned out. Look at Mocaline, if she had her mother with her, how different her life would have been. The Ashbys might have remained in Ireland to be burned out. Oh no, Mr. Barrow, I would never let that happen to ones of me own. I surely know how that is, feeling as you do about this family, in this house. But they were burned out, anyway. Jack Prue stared at him for a moment, and then put a hand to his flask again. Thomas decided to let that line of questioning drop. Why do you do it? For your country? I can understand that. Millions starved when the Praties died on us. People emigrated. People came here. Anglo-Irish landlords sent our crops to England. Bloated bellies, starving children, mouths stained on the dead as people were driven to eating grass, Mr. Barrow, to stave off their hunger. Then I wonder you are not angrier, Thomas told him. And I believe you to be a dangerous man, Mr. Prue. I would not like you as my enemy. And where will the Jamesons go, then, if not back to Ireland? Milo was at the back door, still talking to Daisy. She saw them and raised a hand. America, Mr. Barrow, though I will not be with them then. Like you, I am not a marrying man, and it is not liked by fathers and brothers when I get together with the sweet Kalins back at home. He left Thomas's side and took a few steps towards Milo, who said her goodbyes and hurried over to him. I'll be taking her back now, Mr. Barrow, Jack Prue told him. Then as Thomas passed near he bent his head, causing Thomas to be shocked to the core by his words. Branson has no claim, I can assure you of that. I am sorry for you about the money. The money? Thomas was confused. What money? The Marconi money, after the scandal. Didn't you know? It has been recovered, I am sorry to say. Prue glanced in the direction of Milo's wake, as she began her hurried walk towards the gamekeeper cottage. You don't know, do you? Know what? But Prue had placed a sympathetic hand on Thomas's arm. The money the Marconis paid for Ernest's invention that Milo gifted. It has been rescinded. You have lost it all.